It actually looks like there's still a line at the bathroom, so it should be. Okay. So, as I mentioned when we first began, that the topic of the talk today is going to be the causes of happiness. Some of the causes of happiness that arise from our Dharma practice. And I kind of became interested in this, as a contemplation several years ago when I read this story about the Dalai Lama, that he was traveling in Colorado, and he had stopped to have lunch with a group of people. I think it was in Colorado. And the way I kind of imagined it was that everyone was sitting around at the table, being very polite and smiling, and kind of, you know how it is when you're with someone that you really admire and have read about and seen, but you don't really know them in the way that you would know the people that you normally have lunch with. So in the midst of this kind of, polite, careful conversation, the waitress came over and she sat down and next to the Dalai Lama and said, "Is it okay if I ask you a question?" And he said, "Of course." And she said, "What's the meaning of happiness?" I blew it. What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of life? So everybody kind of got, awake. Here's this person really asking the question that's, deeply on their mind. What's the meaning of life? And the Dalai Lama answered, happiness. And then he said, that's the easy question. That's easy. That's the meaning of life. The more difficult question is what leads to happiness? What creates happiness? That's the more important question that we all have to grapple with in our lives. Is it money, houses, friends? What is it? Or is it compassion and a good heart? What really is the source of happiness? And this kind of cause and effect, investigation is at the heart of the Buddha's teachings. That's what the Buddha set out to try to find out when he was on his journey, was, what's the cause of suffering? What is the cause of suffering? And implied in that was, what is the cause of happiness? And when he had his deep realization and was awoken to the truth of the way things are, the way he expressed those truths in the Four Noble Truths is suffering and its cause, and the end of suffering, or happiness, and its cause. So cause and effect is really at the heart of the Buddha's teachings. And it's not based in belief. It's based on really investigating and understanding from your own experience, in your own body, mind, heart, what is the cause of happiness. And I heard a story not that long ago on the moth that I felt really expressed one of the foundational causes of happiness on the Buddhist path, which is generosity. And it's said that the Buddha didn't teach, when he met people for the first time, and he was not their teacher yet, he taught generosity before he taught the Four Noble Truths. That was the foundation of the practice, and sometimes it's called the path that leads to the path, is generosity. So this story that I heard on The Moth, which is, that wonderful podcast of people telling stories from their personal life, was organized around the theme of life-changing events. And so this man was telling a story about an event that changed his life. And he was an Indian student living in India. He was an engineering student at engineering school. And his uncle went to America and was coming back to visit him at school. And his uncle, when he sees him, said, "I brought you something. It's amazing. It's from America. It's Kit Kat." And he gave him, the Kit Kat. And then when he left, there he was with this Kit Kat, this amazing thing from America. And he really wanted to taste it. But his dilemma was that in the tradition, I don't know if this is throughout India or if it was just at his school, whenever you had food, you shared it with your roommate. That was the values he was raised with, to share his food with his roommate. But he was sitting there with this Kit Kat, and it looked so good and so amazing that he felt like, well, if I have a little taste, it's not really going to matter. So he opened it up, he tasted it, he said it really was amazing, and he decided to have a little more. And one bite led to another bite, and then he said that he had this kind of distorted logic that told him, well, there's so little left now, I might as well eat the whole thing. And then something kind of incredible happened, because he'd never seen or heard of Kit Kat before. His roommate came in, and he was kind of feeling a little self-conscious and, ashamed at what he'd done. And his roommate came in, and his roommate looked really happy. And he looked him in the eyes and he said, "I have something amazing. It's from America. It's Kit Kat." And he said, "Let's eat it together." And they were in engineering school, so he took out a ruler and he divided it really in half, just like perfectly in half. He sat facing him, opened it up, and they both ate it together. And he said as he looked in his, his roommate's eyes and saw how happy and joyful he was, and felt his own sense of shame and diminishment, he said at that point he thought he really had gotten a message from God, and he changed his life and began to practice whenever he could generosity. And then it did actually change his life. This is what the Buddha says. Let's see if I can find it here. "If beings knew, as I know, the results of giving and sharing, they would not eat without having given, nor would the stain of miserliness overcome their minds. Even if it were their last bite, their last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared if there was someone to receive their gift." So this feeling of generosity, this felt sense, that embodied sense, is really a big source of happiness when we become Dharma practitioners, when we actually are committed to discovering for ourselves the truth of the way things are, when we commit to ourselves to do no harm, which is actually a profound act of generosity. This actually brings happiness into our lives, brings peace of mind. Ajahn Lee says this. He was a great forest master, and actually a master of the teaching of the breath, which is kind of why I started there today with that breath meditation. I was thinking about him. "People who develop the habit of being generous reap many rewards. Their act of generosity comes back to them in the present and on into the future. They have lots of friends. Other people trust them. Their hearts are light. They aren't weighed down with worries about looking after the things they've given away. And these same results will keep coming in the future, just as when we have a bucket of rice grains. If we plant them in a field, we'll reap 10 buckets of rice in return. The same holds true with goodness we developed in this lifetime. It gives enormous returns. That's how people of discernment understand it. So discernment is actually what we develop with mindfulness. We start to see clearly. We discern what leads to happiness, what leads to suffering. And generosity leads to happiness. And one of the things that Sayadaw Tejaniya teaches is this sense that every mind moment creates a legacy. So that when we are generous, we leave a legacy of generosity. When we're withholding, we leave a legacy of withholding. So this is actually really important. You know, you can't plant mango seeds and get an orange tree. You can't be bitter and resentful as a way of developing peace of mind. It just doesn't work that way. There's a saying that I thought was from the Buddha, but it's actually on fake Buddha quotes. But it's still a very good saying. It has a lot of wisdom, that there's no path to peace and happiness. Peace and happiness is the path. It's not out there, it's right here. So if you want to develop peacefulness, mindfulness, generosity, kindness, whatever it is, we have to do it in the moment that we're experiencing. Wanting something doesn't make it happen. We have to make it happen with our thoughts, our speech, and our actions. My cousin, I was visiting her. She's a cook, and at the time she was teaching in a cooking school. And the person that she was teaching with, husband had suddenly died, and she was fairly young, and they had young children. It was a family, and it was just very tragic and sad, and her life was very chaotic and difficult, and it was during that transition time, and she didn't buy groceries, and it was time for school, and she opened up the refrigerator door, and there was nothing to feed the kids, so she packed them up in the car, and they went through the McDonald's drive-through for breakfast before school. And when she got to the window of, to pay for the meals for her family, the person behind the counter said that the person in front of her had paid for their meal. And, she started crying. She was just so touched by the kindness. And then she paid for the meal of the person behind her. And this is kind of how it works, It's really what we do, how we're generous in our lives really has a big impact on other people and leaves this legacy for the future. I know sometimes the future can feel very abstract. I remember one of the things that I found really fascinating when I was little in school was that when we look at the stars at night, a lot of them have already gone, because it takes so long for the light to reach us. But it does. And we have to kind of really hold on to how we are interconnected through time, through space, when we take these acts of courageous kindness, really, how it impacts the world. When we kind of understand the power of our actions and our speech, of thinking in the moment, I think the practice of renunciation, of letting go of greed, hatred, and delusion also become a happiness practice. We're not letting go of beauty or love or enjoyment, but we're letting go of fixating, of demanding, of greed, hatred, and delusion in our mind. And it's easier, it's a lot easier to do that when we really understand cause and effect. So we can think of renunciation as, like, in a way, the retreat container was like renunciation. It, we're letting go of a lot of the distractions in our lives so that we can see the mind clearly. But then we're also practicing renunciation so that, when we do see clearly, we're practicing renunciation because it's a way of creating happiness. What we're letting go of is greed, hatred, and delusion because they cause suffering. So there's a story I heard from a yoga teacher about how, I don't know which tribe it is, but it was a tribal people, how they would find water when there was a drought, is that they would put a banana inside a gourd and make a little hole, and the monkey would find the gourd and put their hand in and hold on to the banana, but then they couldn't get it out. So they just would stay there and stay and stay and stay for long periods of time until they got really thirsty. And so the people from the tribe would break the gourd, the monkey would be free, and then it would run to where there was water. So that's why they would do this. But that's kind of how we are. We just get, we fixate on something and we can't let it go. We just keep, there's just so little fist, honestly. You can just grab, you can punch, but you can't really, the whole expression of our humanity is very limited if we're all caught up grasping. This kind of joy of letting go, I heard a couple of times expressed in retreat. I'm going to read what this yogi wrote. And actually, now that I think about it, Trudy was also on that retreat. So this is what the woman said at the end. It was a 2-month retreat at Spirit Rock. I came to California from Minnesota for the sun, and it rained almost every day I was here. For 2 months, I almost never had dessert, never had chocolate. I was a few miles from the ocean, and I never saw the sea. I cleaned bathrooms every day and rarely spoke to another person. And yet, I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. This kind of, actually, I wasn't going to tell this story, but it reminds me of a time that I was on retreat, and it was at the Forest Refuge. And the way that retreat works is people are coming and going all the time. It's not like a set time frame. You just kind of go and sort of come in when you come in. And so when you come in, you come in because someone else is leaving, so you're given their job. You don't get there early and get online and so you can get the job you want. You just get the job you're given. And my job was to be the breakfast yogi, which I was so kind of shocked that that's the job I got, and kind of freaked out by it because I'm not a morning person. So it means you've got to wake up while it's dark and get in there and serve breakfast, which is kind of one of the main events of the day, to all these people. And I was just so freaked out about it. And what made it even worse is the person who trained me for the job, which was the person who did it before me, didn't like the job, and she let me know. And so I was really stressed out about it. But for some reason, the kind of renunciation I had to do to just kind of say, okay, I'm not going to ruin my retreat worrying about this job. I'm just going to do it. It led to honestly, I remember going in to Joseph Goldstein and saying, when I do my yogi job, I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. And it was something about there was all these jam jars, and you would turn every one and then place the jam jars, the lids upside down and a spoon like on each one. And it was almost like making a beautiful textile or something, like laying out all the different items. And one morning, actually, I was standing there with like this big thing of porridge, and I saw 3 bears outside. It was like, I felt like I was in my own fairy tale, you know, so, you know, it's just, yeah. And then another time I heard someone at the end of a retreat, it was the 3-month retreat at IMS, said, I had a really amazing retreat. I had so many insights and fantastic experiences while I was here, and I can't remember any of them. And the teacher said, that's not a problem. The value of our practice is not what we gain, actually, on retreat. It's what we let go of. It's not, then they said, this isn't a Dharma store. It's more like a Dharma dump. So, yeah. To actually not understand what happiness is. I think one of the real examples of that confusion is when we drive down Sunset Boulevard here in LA and see all the billboards of these supposedly happy people with perfect teeth and wonderful smiles, you know, sitting next to beautiful people in bars, you know, like that's kind of like the, you know, the pinnacle of accomplishment and success and happiness, you know, as demonstrated on these billboards. But like, really, are people happy in those situations? I mean, is that where you feel at ease? You know, so we have to really also think about what is happiness, and this is what Trungpa Rinpoche wrote: "For the brave, it's joyful to be in such good health, joyful to keep such good posture, joyful to experience that you're alive, that you're here. You can appreciate the colors of the world, and you can appreciate the temperature of the air. You can appreciate smells, and you can appreciate sounds. There's a tremendous feeling of pleasure and appreciation. But at the same time, there is sadness. It's like the sound of a flute, which is so melodic and so beautiful that it ravishes your mind. It's almost like a mixed blessing, sweet and sour together. So joy brings a sense of sadness at the same time. Joy doesn't stay by itself. If it does, there must be something wrong with it, something perverted about it." So this happiness of the Dharma does come with a sense of poignancy, this appreciation for how fleeting our lives are, that every life will have challenges. It's not the happiness that clings to itself, that creates walls and boundaries. It's a happiness of an open heart. And that's why when we talk about the sublime, divine abidings of the heart, it's loving kindness and compassion. It's sympathetic and appreciative joy and equanimity. It's having a heart that responds to what's happening with openness and connection and a sense of belonging, you know, sense of friendship. It's called the Cloth Sutta, and I was a weaver for many years, and I love textiles, and so, you know, I like when the Buddha uses images like from life that I can appreciate. And, you know, I've actually been to India, and kind of, you know, the textiles there are just so exquisite. And The story is that someone comes up to the Buddha and says, that they do these purification rituals regularly, bathing in, maybe it was the Ganges, I don't know what river it is, and, in order to have a favorable rebirth. And the Buddha said, that you can bathe as much as you want, but until you purify your heart and mind and let go of greed, hatred, and delusion, you will suffer. You will suffer in the future. And then he gave this description that if you take a beautiful silk cloth from Varanasi, where the most beautiful textiles were from, and you take that cloth and you put it in a dye, if there are stains or dirt on the cloth, no matter how beautiful the cloth and how beautiful the dye, when you pull it out, it's not going to be even. You're not going to have a beautiful textile. That dirt on the cloth is going to show. And it's just like that with the mind. So when there's, I didn't know you were here. You, yeah. I haven't seen you in so long. that if there's greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind, it's going to block out and prevent this pervasive loving kindness. And he said when it's gone, when you've cleaned out the mind and purified the heart, then what you'll experience is really profound confidence in the Dharma, in your Buddha nature, in the community. You're going to feel that when you clear out this kind of mess in your heart. And the result will be feeling loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity in every direction. Just pervasive feeling of loving kindness and responsiveness. So, I think we all know that to some degree. That if we can just let go of the fixations and obstacles, there's this natural ease and wish to be of benefit and a desire to be friendly and connect with others and kind to ourselves. It just naturally happens. This kind of preoccupation with ourself is one of the deepest sources of suffering, causes of suffering. Me, what does it mean to me? Like, it's just like we can't, who am I? What am I doing? Like, just over and over, this kind of preoccupation with ourselves, even in the most sublime meditative states. Suddenly, is this right? What am I doing? It's just, we're just really obsessed with ourselves. And there's an interview with the Dalai Lama with Oprah. And, the whole interview is great if you ever want to Google it and read it. But the end, she asks this question, that she always asks everyone, what do you know for a fact to be true? And the Dalai Lama says, altruism is the best source of happiness. I know that for a fact. That I know that to be true. And this is really, we talk about practicing mindfulness, being in the present moment. But we're training the mind to be in the present moment so that in that present moment, we can leave a legacy of happiness. So part of this practice is kind of letting go of the grip of being self-centered, moving from being self-centered to being Dharma-centered, to actually make our decisions, our speech, our action, not come out of how we feel, but more of what we value, That's where we're training the mind, because left to its own devices, it doesn't do that. We want to train the mind to be attuned to what's needed right now. What would be helpful right now? It's a poem from Mary Oliver.
I have to steal this one from you.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I better read this before the juice runs out. I thought the earth remembered me. She took me back so tenderly, arranging her dark skirts, her pockets full of lichens and seeds. I slept as never before, a stone on the riverbed, nothing between me and the white fire of the stars but my thoughts, as they floated light as moths among the branches of the perfect trees. All night I heard the small kingdom breathing around me, the insects and the birds who do their work in the darkness. All night I rose and fell as if in water, grappling with a luminous doom. By morning I had vanished at least a dozen times into something better. So that just kind of release of this preoccupation, this separation, this sense of isolation and loneliness, that we're all so suffering from loneliness, really, to letting go of like this separate self and really opening our hearts. So I think that that's actually probably enough for today. So let's just gently close our eyes for a moment. Let's just do our dedication now. And then we'll open to Q&A after. Let's dedicate our practice, our good intentions, our goodwill, friendship, wisdom, and compassion to all beings everywhere without exception. May we live peacefully and know the joy of a peaceful heart. So thank you for your practice, and for those of you who would like to stay for a Q&A, you're welcome to stay. And also don't feel self-conscious about going on to the rest of your day. So there's a question here. Okay, there's, yeah. Okay.
So I guess my wife bought tickets last night to Eckhart Tolle and Marianne Williamson. I saw a bunch of Inside LA stuff in the lobby.
Oh, good.
But I just have a question about sort of cynicism in a certain sense. So the first half of the talk was Marianne. Is that her name, Marianne Williamson? But I don't have a lot of experience with.
I don't either, honestly.
And then the second half was Eckhart Tolle. Now, I guess I found myself kind of struggling a little bit because like 90% of what she was saying was in line with the Dharma. But then there was like little tidbits of things that felt kind of rooted in Christianity to me, just the languaging. And every time she would hit on one of those little things, I kind of bristled and would find myself withdrawing from what she was saying. So I was kind of like going, well, what's going on there with me? Because like she would talk about things about love and compassion, and I'd go, oh, that totally makes sense. That's completely in line with what I believe, or that's giving me joy. And then she would use little words here and there that made me go, well, wait a minute. That doesn't sound in line with what I believe. So I just want to know, like, and it only matters to me in so much as my wife is like, why are you so cynical at this moment? And I'm, and it's like, and then Eckhart Tolle got there, and he's like very based into Dharma thinking, and I was like all on board with that. And so I came away from the night kind of like in not exactly in an argument with my wife, but she was like, you go to InsightLA every weekend. You're so in mindfulness. Like, why can't you cut this woman some slack? Like, what's the deal? You think she's an imposter, but what you believe is not. And so, not that I thought she was an imposter, but there was something being triggered in me. Like, it was subtle, but there was something that didn't work for me. So I don't know.
What do you think?
I mean, I think the problem starts maybe with the fact that we paid money for these tickets. Like, in other words, like, it wasn't donation based, right? So already I'm skeptical. But I think, I don't know. I think that there's a part of me that feels. I guess I can only keep investing in the ideas that I do believe in. I mean, I think in the end, it really is a matter of going, what makes me feel more comfortable or more passionate? And if it doesn't work for me, just don't judge it. Just be like, oh, it doesn't work for me. Move on. There's nothing gained in me holding malice against her point of view, really. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's your point of view. Go, all these people are like psyched about it, so do their thing. I mean, I think that's the challenge for me. It's like I see other people getting she's riling people up like they're in church or something, and I'm like, cool, go with that. You do your thing. I mean, people are like really frothing at it, and the whole time I'm just looking at them, going like, yeah, okay. I just. Yeah, and some part of me is worried that my wife's going to be frothing too, and I'm like, what happens if she starts frothing at this and I can't? Anyway, I have no idea.
Yeah, well, the Buddha recommends that we actually look at the mind. I think this person over here is next, and then, okay.
What's it called?
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
So I met Marianne in the mid-'80s. And it was the first time she was on the west side. Listening to her, I said, wow, she's wonderful. And then during an intermission, I went up to her. I said, I loved everything you said, but all this talk about Christ and sin. I said, first of all, I don't believe in sin, and all this talk about that. She says, well, first of all, I'm coming from the Course in Miracles. And she says, well, I'm talking about Christ. I'm not talking about Christ. I'm talking about the Christ consciousness. Which is very different. And then when I mentioned sin is a Greek word. It's an archery term for missing the target. And I said, that makes sense. I know Marianne very well. She's wonderful, really wonderful. She's the real deal. But we can talk about that later.
Thank you.
I didn't have the code book. I was just hearing Christ and sin. And wait a minute. I need the key.
Yeah, I've heard her speak too. And I go through this because I have been at what we used to be called Science of Mind, but we changed it because everybody would question us about it. So now we're Centers for Spiritual Living. Okay, and that's what they have rebranded themselves as. And so my son's going to be ordained as a Buddhist monk on the 27th. By Gary. So I have both the Buddha, by Gary. I have both the Buddhist and the Centers for Spiritual Living crossover, and sometimes it does get a little confusing. And just what you said was right on. The Christ consciousness and sin was, I had a little coloring book for my kids when they were little that had the archery, sin, and the archer missing the mark.
Right.
They colored that in. But I guess what I do is I take what you said. I take what makes me happy from Science Mind, and I take what makes me happy. And to me, they don't really disagree with each other, But it took a while to hit that crossover, between the two. So, that would just be my answer.
Thank you.
wondering, when there's resentment and anger,
Mm-hmm.
and there's the possibility of resolving it with the person who you have those, it's just impossible at this time, too far away, etc. Or unwillingness on their part. I mean, it is really bothering me a lot, and I just really want to let it go. I don't know. I would like to know how I would be able to let that go. And then also, what's behind of, I think there is a suffering when there's me. What's behind of that the person is, occupied with me. But what's behind, what's the psychological, what that person gets, that, because it is negative, it's the thing that, the result is negative, but what's serving her or him that there is that, sense of meaning.
Well, the first question, about resentment and anger, there are a series of teachings from Tibetan Buddhism called, the Lojong slogans. They're little sayings. I can't remember how many there are, but they're very, paradoxical, and they have humor in them, and they're, I think Pema Chodron's book, Start Where You Are, also is a teaching about those slogans. And one of the slogans is stay close to your resentment. And, I was practicing with the slogans for a period of time, and that one really landed on me, stay close to your resentment, because I had some resentments. What I discovered in my investigation of resentment is that it's based in a feeling of powerlessness, that there's nothing you can do, and there may be nothing you can do to change this other person, but you do have power. You do have power over how you're relating to the situation. And, a lot of resentment, I think, can come from a lack of courage, in the sense of moving forward in reality, in the reality that's presenting itself. So when you kind of relax and make space and are less fixated, there's more choices about how to go forward. That going forward may not have anything to do with the other person. So that's kind of what I think. And then that was my discovery about it. And then in terms of the me, why do we do that? I think it's biological, it's karmic, it's like cause and effect. There's been a lot of cause and effect for probably eons that create this sort of sense that we're separate, and that we could, the delusion that we could, find happiness by being mean to somebody else, by getting back, by being vengeful, or by taking what isn't offered, so that we get enough for ourselves first, not realizing the instability of that, the kind of inherent violence and sort of instability of that. And actually, until we train our mind, just on automatic pilot, the only happiness we really know is getting what we want. So there's a lot, it takes really, that's why I think in the Buddhist path, training the mind and the heart, becoming concentrated and making effort in that direction is really important, because we have instincts that keep driving us towards creating harm, to train our mind to let go of that.
And then the mindfulness, by training your mind, just keep practicing. So if it comes to your mind, you will let go.
Yes.
If it comes to your mind, you will
Right.
let it go. And then it becomes, your mind gets trained up.
Right. The other thing, though, there's another piece, I think. It's not just training the mind to let go, but actually sustaining mindfulness so that we begin to see cause and effect. We begin to see that when we let go of unskillful actions, we get a happier result. We have to see the cause and effect, because then wisdom develops, and we don't want to. So we're actually doing it in the service of wisdom. That takes more than just being in the present moment. It takes being in the present moment continually enough to see cause and effect. Because we can't do it through will. We can't let go through determination. And in the end, it has to be through the development of wisdom. Yeah. So maybe this will be the last question.
Thank you so much. The compassionate touch was really powerful.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and just your whole talk. Yeah, I appreciate it. So my question is, when it comes to generosity, so the story about the Kit Kat, I mean, he sees the enjoyment in the other, you know, in his roommate, and I wonder, is that the source of joy with generosity, or is it, because, you know, I'm like, is that introducing selfishness that I require seeing?
Oh,
you know,
the
enjoyment in the other person, like, or is it like I pay for my stranger's groceries and don't get to like see that?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
So it's like the difference between like directly volunteering with somebody who's struggling versus like giving money. Like I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think also, just to point out, I think the insight he had was that the freedom of, like, his roommate was feeling happy. The sharing made him happy, right? Mm-hmm. So I think these are really important, like, reflections, what you're asking. And I do think that sometimes when we give to be appreciated, the purity of that happiness is colored, actually. Because when we, there's something inherent in just giving that says, I have enough. Like that feeling of having enough, the okayness of that, not needing the recognition, that's the sign of wisdom. Whether or not it's acknowledged or not, we are interconnected, and this is a path towards building a future happiness. So does that make sense? Like, yeah. But even though I think it's still better to give, you know, if we can purify that, you know, it's, not to be hard on yourself because there's some satisfaction of having somebody know. Yeah, but you know, when we need that, then we're kind of trapped. Yeah. So, all right, thanks everybody.
One of the slogans, don't expect applause.
Don't expect applause is actually the last of the slogans.
To Donna.
So that is actually, I'm sorry guys, Donna.
And the Donna button.
Yeah, there's we actually need your generosity to continue to meet like this. So really appreciate it. Thank you.